lane fast, call it high speed. I've been working hard, yeah, I've been working nightly. If you think you'll win, ha, not fucking likely. I be taking shots, yeah, cold-blooded, icy. Watching numbers grow is what I call sightseeing. In the front row, run it up when they hype me. The following grows, they know how to ignite me. Call me CEO, I've been running shit right, see. And I ain't playing games, I create my own lane, making pleasure out of pain, turning losses into gains.
Good morning, everyone. So, happy Independence Day. Today in our studio, we have Ankit Shah. Ankit is a chartered accountant from ICAI and he is a PhD from GNLU. Ankit is former academic and research associate of IIM Ahmedabad. He is very interested in geopolitics. He is a geopolitical observer and an analyst. We are going to talk to him to understand what does this de-dollarization mean for India and the world at large, actually. So welcome, Ankit. Welcome to our studio.
Namaskar, sir. So thank you for hosting me. To begin de-dollarization, we have to understand where and how it began. So after the Second World War, we had this Bretton Woods agreement, due to which, United States dollar became the reserve currency status of the world. And all the West-led institutions, United Nations, World Bank, IMF, all these are US dollar funded institutions. And that is how, the economics for the world started functioning from there. Now, in 1971, what happened was, we saw that there was huge economic fallout for President Nixon back home. And we know that US administration at that point in time understood the importance of the Indian economy. And that point in time, they realized that if they remove gold from the peg for the currencies, they are actually going to dominate the world and they will be able to suck out the wealth of all the nations of the world with the reserve currency status that the US dollar had. So around in the early months of 1971, Prime Minister Indira Gandhi was declared as one of the most admired person in the world in the non-communist faction of countries in a Gallup poll. Yeah. And this is something which really irritated the US administration. I mean, they have been very hateful and, that the negative kind of a connotation with Indians and the Indian administration, as you see when the classified information came out about the exchanges between Kissinger and Nixon and that particular era with Indira Gandhi as the leader. Yeah. So you realized he selected 15th August 1971 to declare, the divorce of gold and US dollar. And that is the point in time when, US got real hegemony all over the world. I mean, each and every transaction, not just were supposed to happen in the US dollar. Even if the countries wanted some kind of loans from international bodies, IMF, World Bank, all those were to happen in the US dollar. The SWIFT payment system, which was established, functions in the US dollar, which means that US can sanction or bail any country, any person, any time in the world. So this is the kind of hegemony the US dollar had. Now add to that the lethal elimination of the reserve currency status. What happens with that? India wants to, do trade with, say, Myanmar, Cambodia, or Laos, or Sri Lanka. Each of these transactions have to happen in US dollar. Means the entire world has to first work hard and earn US dollars before doing any transaction with anybody in this world. So it was a kind of, a monkey coming between the two cats and taking a huge chunk of commission from all the transactions. Yeah. So this is exactly the role United States had. Now, there were two nations which tried to oppose it, Libya and Iraq. And we realized what happened with Saddam Hussein and Gaddafi later, right? So it was a kind of a military imposition of US dollar for all over the world. Now, the change that has happened in the recent times is countries have come to realize that this is actually what is happening. US is able to loot the savings and the earnings of the rest of the world. None of the countries are able to get the correct value proposition of what they produce for the world, and the US is actually able to pass on the American inflation to the rest of the world. Exactly what is happening. And add to this, the rest of the currencies of the world have clear demand supply rule for pricing, whereas United States does not have that. United States has a reserve currency status. It just prints dollars out of thin air. And since it is printed out of thin air without pure demand and supply, what that means is, it's the safest currency. So the entire world parks its savings in the US dollar and US treasury because it's the safest of all. I mean, US can just print it out and pay you back. So that's the kind of, artificial value and boom in the value of US dollar, which is currently in place. So the countries have come to realize this fact. Sanctions after sanctions, countries have realized that because US has this hegemony, control over the SWIFT payment system, which manages the transactions in the world. US can anytime sanction anyone, any country, any point in time, and bail out anyone, any point in time, and give free aid to anyone, any country, any point in time, creating out of thin air. So this thuggery is now exposed. So the countries of the world are moving towards de-dollarization, especially the big giants like China and Russia, especially Chinese, because they have faced the torture of the Chinese labor for the last 30, 40 years, that the manufacturing giant it became to supply to the entire world. Now it realizes that the same supply could be valued maybe 2 times, 3 times more if US dollar wasn't there. So probably they can have a better work-life balance if they don't want to be that rich, right? They can have more human rights for their own people. So that is why the big giants are moving towards de-dollarization.
Okay. So once I learned all the central banks of all the countries or the major countries, including India, this is owned by the Americans actually, because Americans have invested there, and they are going to control all the currencies actually. So can you just throw some light on this if I am correct?
So the underlying thought process is correct in the sense that the regulation power of the international bodies remains on the US dollar. So that is correct in the sense that many countries of the world, the central bank policies are forced upon with this pure demand and supply. I mean, how many countries want rupees, Indian rupees, if they want to trade? Right? There are many countries trading with India, but I mean, they can actually fuel up the demand for Indian rupees, and maybe the Indian goods and Indian currency have correct valuation if the US dollar was not there, right? So the central banks, the whole setup of central banking linked to US dollar reserve currency status and indexing the foreign exchange rates based on the US dollar is why this hegemony continues. It cannot.
Okay.
So the central banks have this regulation which is centralized around the US dollar, which is why you see this kind of hegemony which the US dollar has. Now, which is why BRICS is working on the nations, right? Especially, I mean, if you just look at the last visit of Blinken few days back in South Africa, he was sitting beside Minister this lady of South Africa, and she just bashed him right and left, because this confidence comes actually from the BRICS currency format which is being worked around, right?
Yeah.
So nobody wants to take the United States as a bully anymore. I mean, all the countries are giving money. Saudi Arabia has, done a demo kind of a yuan oil deal with China. President Xi is going to visit this week in Saudi Arabia, and if they change the entire transaction of $24 billion into yuan or a basket of currencies outside US dollar, it's going to be a big push for the de-dollarization of the world. The SEO format is coming up next week. You have SEO summit in Samarkand. There will again be some declaration over there. So countries after countries, Israel now, I mean, who will even imagine Israel, who's the biggest ally of United States? They
Yes.
have replaced of US dollar from their forex reserves with yuan and
Mm,
also handed over a port terminal to a Chinese company for more than 30 years.
mm.
Uh, Moves are happening behind the curtain towards de-dollarization.
Okay. So I have learned nearly 74% of the world trade is still done with US dollar. So do you think the India's rupee settlement with a few countries that this government has done will going to affect the US dollar in any manner?
Well, in the long term, it's going to be a huge cumulative effect if all the countries are going to go down this path. I mean, we need to give India, the Indian government, credit for kicking in this process, the initiating steps for this de-dollarization process, because from 2016, it is India who started denying all multilateral trade pacts which were US dollar denominated. The biggest instance being RCEP, with China and Australia all were forcing India to join. So India said, no, we are not going for RCEP deal. Whereas when the reasons came out, it was clearly said that it's going to be dumping of some cheaper goods into Indian markets and the Indian businesses will not be able to compete, etc., etc. But we need to understand that the first step towards de-dollarization is bilateral trade pacts, not multilateral. Once it becomes bilateral trade pacts, you are on a negotiating table with a good bargaining position,
Yeah.
asking individual nations that we are going to trade in each other's currency. When it is a multilateral platform, it automatically becomes US dollar because of the international body's hegemony which the US has. So it is India actually which initiated the de-dollarization process with these tiny steps, not even China, right? Not even Russia,
Yeah.
because the RCEP was something which even China was looking forward to. Now the things have changed, especially after sanctions on Russia. Iran always has been under sanctions
Mm,
for so many years after the nuke deal went off.
mm.
So I think this is just coming up. I mean, just 2 days back, we have news from Venezuela saying that we are going to cut off all the oil supplies of European Union. We don't want a we don't want an US sponsored oil deal for
Mm,
US dollar debt program. No,
mm,
we want products. So Venezuela says we want products in
mm,
exchange of our oil with
mm,
individual nations. We don't want US dollars debt program.
mm.
So countries after countries moving towards this. Uh,
So we are the first one actually. Will be remembered for a long time. Starting this
yes,
movement.
we started 2016 with bilateral free trade agreements with individual nations.
Mm,
Um, United Arab Emirates had its first FTA with India. Second was with Israel. So even the countries in the Gulf are moving towards bilateral pacts because they realize that multilateral trade pacts are automatically will become a US dollar scheme of things, which is why if you want to have a bargaining position with individuals nations,
mm.
you can say we are going to trade in each other's currencies, and that is more acceptable format for even the other country to participate in.
Okay, so with this the rupee settlement with a few countries now, what prospects do you see for Indian economy?
So just last 2 months, the trade between India and Russia and India and Sri Lanka has come to around $9 billion, just keeping out US dollar from the equation. So that is the kind of jump which we had. So
Okay.
it's very clear. I mean, after the sanctions on Russia, the ruble has performed exceedingly well, right? It's a proof that if you take out the monkey from between the cats, it is working for everybody.
Yeah.
So this is a way forward. About 30 countries are lining up for a UPI with India, accepting the RuPay card further. Um,
Mm,
there are few nations which are already, I mean, France is a NATO ally after
mm,
all. France is ready for a UPI,
mm.
and they are also ready for working with India on an alternative payments system outside of the SWIFT, the US dollar system. So I think everybody is ready now. It's just about when. It's not about how, it's about when.
Okay, so you said how this is going to benefit the Indian economy. Uh, so the trade will jump naturally when the monkey is out of the system actually. So what other benefits you see to the Indian economy with this bilateral trade?
So the valuation of each currencies will go to what you actually produce for the world, which means that the US dollar is going to be depreciated. They do not have much to export to the world. I mean, if all the countries of the world are going to replace US dollars with top five nations currencies which they buy things from, then automatically US dollar goes out of the picture for many nations, right? So what that means is that the countries of the world would be having better savings. They are going to have better revenues. They are going to have better work life balance. The Chinese labor will not have to work so hard. The IT companies down South India will not have to slog so many hours and still have a good pay.
Mm,
So what that means is your exports are going to be correctly valued, your currency is going to be correctly valued, your savings are going to be correctly valued, your economy is going to be correctly valued, and corresponding to that, the US dollar, when it goes down, it means America becomes an open land for everyone to move about, whether for leisure, for vacations, or for investments. When the pricing, because the pricing will also go down in the assets
yeah.
in the West.
Yeah.
So when the Western assets are to their near real values, the
Mhm.
world will enjoy those Western assets, won't they?
Okay. Okay, so that is all about the prospects actually, but any transformational change like something does have some kind of risk. So, do you think the countries that have started doing trade with India on bilateral platforms? So,
Hmm.
what kind of risk you see for these countries? What kind of risk the rupee settlement can face?
Hmm. For countries which are trading with India in terms of risk, I would see only a military or a bullying risk by the United States,
Yeah, that.
forcing all nations to go back again to the US dollar, or kind of veiled threats and indirect threats of trade and supplies from
Mhm.
the West. That's the maximum what I see, which is why Russia offered up for a Russia, India, China military alliance, because it's going to be clear that the small nations would be bullied
Yes.
to go back to the US dollar, especially some of the weaker African nations,
Mhm.
smaller nations surrounding India like Sri Lanka, Bhutan, Maldives, uh, Bangladesh, Myanmar, uh,
Mhm.
some of the South China Sea countries, this African nations specifically, right? Because these nations could be bullied by military might. So this is one of the biggest risk which I see after de-dollarization. Uh, the world is going to be in an uncertain trajectory for a few years.
So with this, I am moving to my last question actually, that is my concern actually, because in the past we have seen when the American interests are threatened, America goes to any length to just do anything, it does anything. So do you think the American will allow any country to challenge the US dollar? Because it will trigger its decline actually from the sole superpower status and whatever they have been enjoying. So actually, the Americans do anything, and my uh, point is primarily this assassination. They assassinate anyone actually, any leader. If you challenge
Mhm,
the American position, so they go to that length, and they have been doing this around the world actually.
mhm,
So,
mhm.
what kind
So
of
my
opposition you see, and you see the Americans put resort to actually.
I believe this is going to be like a catch 22 for the United States, because there are so many countries which are moving towards it. So I do not know how many countries United States will be able to attack and stop them from moving towards this. And
Hmm.
United States also need to realize that it cannot have this exorcism and hallucinations of a 19th century status anymore. Right? The West is not in that position. The European allies will also have to understand that they already destroyed their supply chains and manufacturing to build the Chinese Communist Party. So the dogs have come back to bark. So they have to face it now. There's no option over here, frankly speaking. And even if United States is going to take some kind of military adventures to stop the de-dollarization from happening, it also is going to face an after effect of the collapse of the international bodies like United Nations, World Bank, and IMF, which I do not see as an advisable or a wise move for United States to do. So I would rather suggest, I mean, if Washington has some sense of wisdom, it should go for placing India into the United Nations Security Council, give correct representation to India, and let India lead this new mix of currency format for everyone in the world, rather than, I think cooperation is a more better uh, option perspective for the West and the United States with the world, rather than a conflict uh, direction, because collapsing of the international bodies is in nobody's interest, especially not the West, especially when dependent on supplies, the Asian supplies. So I don't think so that path is a good path to take. It will also collapse the Western alliance in Europe, NATO. Uh, it's just dark and gloomy for the United States taking that path. I think there should be a realization to the West that it has a very long run in the last 300, 400 years of hegemony that it had. Now it should sit back to its correct place and let the Asia lead the world to a more peaceful and a cooperative format of functioning. Let Asia have its realistic share of representation in bodies like United Nations, World Bank, IMF. Let US dollar come back to its real value, whatever it is, and see what they can produce for the world to export and earn, rather than exporting arms and generating conflicts in.
That's a big concern actually, because this arm industry and equipment and the military equipment and all that, this is such a big industry actually. So this is destroying the world in many ways actually, because when they make the machine, they need to sell it, and for that they create conflicts and all that. So that's not a very constructive approach actually. We should move forward to construction actually, not for the destruction. So that is also a big issue that we can discuss sometime. So that is all about the question. So I hope in near future India gets a seat in United Nation actually. So that
And it is actually India which is in the correct sweet spot where it can become a bridge between the East and the West.
right,
India,
right.
India is in that position where you can have a leader who's going to take along everyone together, including the West,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So I think that would be the correct way the West should move.
And this is also very important for India. So India should have the one party leadership with a strong leader actually, so that this should not change actually within the country actually. This should be the one party and one kind of foreign policy, one way of thinking actually, so that it can achieve its position that belongs to India. So with this, I am coming to the end of the session, because the kind of knowledge and experience you have, your insight, I have a lot of things to discuss with you that we will do sometime. So when we have the time. So this is my last question. So thank you for your time, and this is a very knowledgeable and very good learning for the audience actually. So we'll catch up with you soon whenever you are free.
Yeah.
So
Thank you.
thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Thank you.